Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of Universal Podcast, where every episode combines psychology with another subject. My name is Samuel Arman. I study psychology at Fordham University, and I'm a teacher. I've worked with over 1,000 students, hundreds of teachers, and I'm very excited for this episode to be about psychology and education. And I get the honor of speaking with one of my favorite teachers that I've ever worked with. Elisabetta, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Elisabetta O'Connor, and I teach in Brooklyn, and this is my 8th year of teaching.
Oh, you got 1 year on me. Excellent.
Yep.
Elisabetta, what got you into teaching?
So I took a non-traditional route growing up. My mom and my aunts used to tell me I should teach, and I feel like I avoided it because of that. I don't really know why, but I did. But I did tutoring when I was younger in high school. One of my first jobs was as an educator at the Staten Island Children's Museum. I worked there for almost 10 years part-time, doing various exhibit tours, outreach programs, and after-school programs in other public schools, and at different events, including like baseball games and things like that. And then in college, I worked at the Writing Center as a writing tutor. I was a TA for organic chemistry. So I kind of always did some sort of teaching thing, but I was like really insistent that I was going to be a vet, and that's what I was going to do. And then my senior year of college, I shadowed a vet for a little bit. I realized I didn't really love the idea of putting animals down, and I decided to not do it. My parents were not happy about that, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I still loved animals and wildlife. I always did. So I took a year where I was just working and trying to figure it out. And then I got my first master's in wildlife biology and conservation in Scotland. And that was a great experience. And I really enjoyed that. And over there, I became like a program ambassador where I did like the school tours and educated people about the university at the time. And then I came back and I got a job working for New York State Parks as an environmental educator. I worked at Clay Pit Ponds on Staten Island. So I used to take school groups on basically hiking tours and educate them about the wildlife and the nature there. And I really liked that part a lot. But unfortunately, in New York City, park dies down in the winter. Not too many people like to go out when it's cold. And then in the summer, it's too hot. There were ticks in that park, so people didn't really want to hike in the park in the summer. So there were 6 months where I wasn't really doing much. I'd go in and answer my emails. People didn't really attend programs. So it wasn't very mentally stimulating. And I realized I really enjoyed taking the groups out on hikes and educating them about science and nature. So I decided to go into teaching. So I applied for the New York City Teaching Fellows for biology. I interviewed and I got in. And that kind of began my path to teaching. And I don't regret it at all. I really love it.
That's amazing. And, I have to say, you are definitely one of the best teachers that I've ever had the honor of working with. And you know it from the students more than the teacher. When the students are excited to be in your classroom, when the students are excited for anything regarding school, that's always a very good sign. So let me ask, what do you think makes a good teacher? What are the elements that are part of the personality and the instruction and the style of a successful teacher? And then maybe afterwards we can talk about what makes a sort of a failing teacher, an underperforming teacher.
To me, from working with my other coworkers, including you and other people, I think the number one thing is consistency. Students come from all sorts of backgrounds and family lives, and one thing they all appreciate is someone being consistent. So being present at work, being there for them, showing up every day. I think also remembering that kids are just kids at the end of the day. Most of them are not ill-intentioned. So being able to leave every day when it ends where it is and starting fresh every day with the kids, even when you have some tough moments with them, just reminding yourself that they all have hard days and it really has nothing to do with you usually, what if there is any sort of situation in the classroom. I think willing to be a little silly and cringy goes a long way. Embracing the things they make fun of you for, because kids are always trying to get a reaction out of you. So if your reaction is one where you can kind of flip it back at them or make fun of yourself with it, they definitely appreciate that. And showing a sense of caring for them. I think a lot of students and people in general, not just students, even adults, want someone who cares about them. So even if it's just checking in, like asking them how they are, and or how their game was if you know they play a sport, or their dance recital, just those small things there, trying to do that, and getting to know them beyond the academic strengths or weaknesses they have, and getting to know them as people, they definitely appreciate.
I think that's incredible. And there was one teacher that you and I worked with. His last name started with Z, and I remember he was having some trouble with a group of students who were boisterous and rambunctious, and he didn't know what to do. And he showed me the roster, and I happened to have had some of those students. So he was like, what do I do? This student seemed to like you. How do I get them to calm down and listen for 2 seconds? And I said, well, a lot of these students happen to be on the basketball team. You should go to a game. And he's like, okay, well, like, what should I do at the game? And I was like, you should just watch and cheer or boo them, like mess with them, whatever it is, just be at the game. And he was like, okay, will you come with me? And I don't know if you remember, we all went to that game. And it was, I think it was 2 days later that he came up to me and he was like, that was like a cheat code. They came in, they said good morning to me. I don't really understand. And I think the biggest thing is when you humanize yourself, instead of just putting yourself in that role of I am the didactic teacher who will, you have to do this, this, and this, and that's it. And there's nothing outside of these confines. When they see you outside of the classroom or you discuss things that are outside of the specific small slice of their life, which is the educational properties, it tends to just open up all of these new interpretations of who you are. And it commands a certain level of respect that the person you're talking to, let alone that they came to essentially support you, but they have established a sense of rapport or the potential for rapport. Because if you're just the person drilling information, you're just the person drilling information. There's no life to that. But when you make jokes with them or you discuss certain elements of their life, whether it's their interests or anything of that sort, they respond really strongly to that. And I think it just makes sense with people in general.
Yeah, I agree. I think they just want, again, yeah, someone, and everyone else does, someone that cares about them and shows an active interest in their life. And they might not be getting that in their home lives or from their friends at the time. And I agree, it's a simple thing, but I think things like I don't always succeed at it. I mean, we're not perfect, but once a year to go to at least one of the games if I have students on whatever sports team it is, even if you can only stay 15 or 20 minutes, the kids know you're there. I had a baseball student who asked me to go recently, and I'm not a baseball fan. Look, I'm not gonna lie, but I went for 20 minutes, and I had to leave. And the next day, he came in on his own on the side because I waved at him at the game, and he did that thing where sometimes students pretend they don't know you because they're like too cool in the moment, and it's fine. That's their kids. But the next day he came in the morning and he's like, hey, I just really want to say I appreciate you showing up to the game. So they still see you, like you told our old coworker, you just have to sit there. You just have to go. Whether it's that, whether it's a play or a dance recital, an art show, whatever it is, they definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, and it really is. It's like a front loading task. You do this, and again, their interpretation of you has completely changed, and it's just it really is fascinating. Like for in one circumstance, I wasn't able to go to the game. These were new students, but I heard about the game. So when they came in, I basically was like, oh, I heard you dunked on them and did a 360 between the legs twice. You broke everyone's ankles on the court. And they did not do any such thing, but they started cracking up because I was invested in what they had done over the weekend. and it had a very similar effect. They felt like they were a human being that was cared for, and of course we do care about them beyond just will they be able to have these pieces of content and these skills in their minds when they graduate from our courses. So I think that's a big part of it, and I genuinely believe you do it better than I think almost any other teacher I've ever seen. I know you don't like these compliments, but it's very much true.
Thanks.
On the same subject, but on the other side of the coin, what do you think, besides an utter lack of knowledge on the subject, what do you think makes a bad teacher, or a teacher that's, we'll say, ill-equipped to really be in the classroom?
Yeah. I think when I think of an ill-equipped teacher, it's someone who, yeah, doesn't show any interest in the students, just in them learning content, and that's it. Doesn't really engage with them at all. I think that makes it. It's not saying the person's a bad teacher or trying to be, but it makes it harder in some cases, especially for classroom management. And I've seen that happen where I know people who do struggle, and it's because from what I've seen, it's they just are worried about content and they barely actually speak to the kids as people outside of that. And inconsistency, I think, is one of the things that makes teaching the most challenging. If you say you have an expectation of them and you don't follow through on it, then they know that you're not going to hold them to that standard. So they will kind of run the classroom or keep challenging you. Calling, so it's one of the lowest ones in the book, but calling kids out in front of all their peers negatively doesn't usually create a great response or a good classroom environment. Usually I find, I mean, I've done it at the end of the year where I've called kids out in front of everybody. Unfortunately, like we all make mistakes, but ideally, and they tell you that with teaching, I will pull kids out and try and talk to them outside in the hallway, not in front of everybody. I find that tends to work better with figuring out what's going on and kind of reestablishing the rapport. But yeah, I would say inconsistency and just a general lack of interest, or actually, I don't know, not actually liking the kids, I guess I would say,
I don't think,
or
yeah,
not caring about them. I don't know.
I think it's a interesting scenario if a teacher just doesn't like kids. It's why are you in this profession?
Yeah, yeah, it's not a job where you can do it for just summers off. There's so much social interaction every day and so many situations we deal with that I know we get teased by people in corporate about, oh, you guys have summers off. It's so easy. And my dad constantly makes fun of us when we complain about not having off or whatever. And he wouldn't last a day in the classroom. He does not have the patience for it. Like, you have to genuinely like what you're doing to be a teacher.
When I tell people I work from essentially 8 o'clock to about 2:40, 3 o'clock, they're like, "Oh, you're so lucky. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
wish my work ended at 3." It's like, well, I'm grading until like 7, so I don't really. It's really basically 8 to 7. But
Grading, planning
yeah,
lessons,
grading.
changing lessons, calling
Yeah.
parents if you are doing that sometimes.
Oh, that's another thing. Another great strategy that I've used is I love calling home with as many parents as possible in like the first 3, 4, 5 weeks. I really try and aim to
Yes.
call everyone, and I love to give good news. So
Yeah.
if there's a quiz on like week 3, I love to call the parents. I'm like, is this the parent of Alessandro? And they'll be like, yes. It's like, hi. So I'm Alessandro's English teacher. I just wanted to tell you about what happened today. And then I hear this silence, and you can hear the tension in the phone. And I'll just be like, they did amazingly, and the parents just hear this like immediate catharsis that's so palpable on the phone. But it also lets the parents know that if there is a problem later on, that you're someone who's calling not to just give bad news every single time. You're someone who is not just trustworthy, but someone who's trying to give an accurate depiction of the student. And the student will come in the next day, and this is a real example. It just comes in and is like what? Like that was amazing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
please keep calling them every time I do something right. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. But just keep it up and don't give me a reason to call for something negative, please.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That is one of the things. The one time I did mentor a new teacher, I was telling her at the time, I was like, try and find something in the first 3 weeks of school. It could be the smallest thing too, like that they participated once, and reach out to the parent with it and use that as a way to introduce yourself as their teacher for the year. And like you said, most parents are very tense when you call because they're very confused because usually calls home are about bad things. And it definitely is a really easy and fast way to establish rapport with a kid, especially if you've heard from other teachers. Like, so my school is 6 to 12. So like we talk to the seventh grade teachers before we have eighth grade. And you've taught 12th grade. So if you have 11th grade teachers the year before that you hear about that are notoriously difficult or hard, if you can find something about those kids really early on, it definitely helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's, with teaching, you can have all the theory in the world in your mind. If you can't execute it, it's just not going to work out well. So, I've had scenarios where one student is very loud and disruptive. And, you can, as you said, you can call out the student, which doesn't seem to work very well. Or you can have that student be essentially the leader of a group. And because they're the one that is clearly commanding with their voice, they're the ones who will rise up to that occasion. They're the ones who will be most equipped with we'll call it the extroversion or social intelligence, or even just the energy and charisma to rally their group to, accomplish a particular task. And that works so well. And calling them out works so poorly. So it just, you learn over time what works and what doesn't. Of course, as you said, no teacher is perfect. There's going to be a certain, time where you're just frustrated and you dealt with a annoying parent about a completely extraneous issue, and you're grading and there's just stacks of papers, and then one student's disruptive and you're like, can you please just like, could we just keep it down? And the student gets a little bit offended by that, and you have to deal with that now.
Yeah. It also depends on the cohort you have as a group, but I've had years where I've been able to, or you can use those students too to do different tasks for you, whether or not, usually our do now is we'll use for just completion for a grade if we do grade it. And you can use those students and let them grade it for their peers, and they love that kind of role in the classroom or power. And I do find usually when you let them do it, they are honest about it. Like, because people have asked me, aren't you worried about them making up the grades for their friends and like giving their friends a better grade? But kids usually are pretty honest when you let them be, especially when you give them a role that they have more power in.
It's almost like you're academifying gossiping.
Yep. Yeah.
You're like giving them an opportunity to spill tea to each other. It's like,
Yep. Or letting them lead going over the do now. Again, it's dependent on some years. Like, I've had groups that are shyer, so it's not worked out as well with. But if there are some classes, like last year, we had some kids who really like doing it. And it's a great management tool too, because they like being like, I'm talking, please be quiet. And you don't really have to do as much. And it's kind of funny. But they do enjoy those kind of roles too. Those usually the loud kids do too. They do like leading that kind of stuff.
I very much love the loud kids. The ones, I mean, if you
Yep, you
remember,
do.
one of the
You
things
do.
that was, well, yeah, one of the, I forgot, not exactly like nicknames or whatever for me, but there was this thing where all the, quote unquote bad or disruptive kids, like bring them to Mr. Armen.
Yep.
So a lot of these students who are more problematic or disruptive or extremely hyperactive, those are the ones that I especially enjoyed, because I would vibe with that energy very well. And I would just try and just meet them at their level and discuss a bunch of things, and then be like, well, why are you giving so and so a hard time? And they'll be like, I don't know. They just don't like. They're just annoying. It's like, all right, well, a lot of people are annoying. You don't disrespect all of them, do you? And they're like, no. It's like, all right, well, consider that it's gonna hurt you at the end of the day. So aim it at yourself. Remember that whatever you're doing here is gonna come back to you. So just be respectful. If you don't like the person, just consider whatever it is that you want for that class, or your grade or your GPA or whatever it is. But just don't make life more difficult for yourself. It's going to serve you at the end.
Yeah, it's a good life skill, and it's one I try to emphasize too when kids are bickering or arguing with each other or when they don't like their group. It's like it's going to be a life skill. It's going to be a professional skill. You're not always going to like your coworkers, but you still have to be civil and get the work done so that it's completed at the end of the day and support each other. You're working together regardless towards a common goal. And then, of course, if you tell them that, they're like, "Oh, who do you not like? Who do you not like on staff?" They want to know the teen. I'm like, that's not the point. It's just an
But that's
example.
amazing. But that's amazing because that shows again, if a student has the not gall, but if they have the desire to even know about that, let alone asking, but the desire to know that about you, you have succeeded at humanizing yourself. If they start asking those kind of questions, and I've had students come to me and say, "Mr. Armin, who's your favorite teacher at the school?" And I would tell them my favorite teacher of the next grade, hoping that they have that teacher, and there's a decent chance that they would, and I would be excited. I would sometimes list two or three or four teachers, and then they have that teacher the next year, and they come in with that excitement, and it's just fantastic. I love having the power to make things more beneficial for these kids.
Yeah, I mean, the end goal is to hopefully provide them with the best education we can, so that they can have all the opportunities possible, even if they don't want them necessarily. But the city is so behind in so many ways on education, and it's so segregated and such a problem. We're just trying to help them, and yeah, that's the goal at the end of the day, and to
Right.
make school a pleasant environment, a place they want to be.
Yeah. So in terms of, so now we're kind of zooming out a little bit. Let's go there. So um, we mentioned before that people sometimes say that teaching must be an easy job because if it's on paper, it's short duration. And you and I know that that is extremely far from the truth. It is taxing in so many different ways. But what would you say are some of the things that the average person doesn't know about being a teacher that you think would be very important to highlight?
I would think one of the things that people don't know is you can be told to teach classes that are outside of your license area. So I am licensed in biology, but I'm currently teaching chemistry. They can give you, I think most of your program has to be in your content area, but I think they can give you 40% of your classes can be outside of your content area. So it could technically be something like art or something that's not related to your content at all. I think that's something that shocks people, that you're able to be told to teach something that you're not licensed in. Um, do nows. My dad recently asked me what a do now is. And I was telling him it's supposed to be an access point for your lesson that all students can answer, but that kind of starts the lesson and gets them into it, or gives them an idea of what the topic's going to be that they're learning that day. And then he said, you have to do those every day? And I said, yeah. And he said, and you have two different content classes. He said, are they just given to you, like by my admin? And I said, no, I find them myself or I make them. He's like, what do you mean you make them? I said, I come up with them in my head and how they relate to the content area. And he was trying to do the math quickly of how many days are in the school year. And he's like, so if you have two different content areas, that's how many. He's like, that's over like what 300 do nows you're coming up with a
Right.
day. I mean, for not a day, for the year. And I said, yeah. And he's like, that's a lot. And I was like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it than you think.
But you would say that you probably enjoy that creative process too. Like that there is an excitement to that, right?
Yes,
Maybe not
yeah.
300 times.
No, no, and I mean, give or take, we don't do nows necessarily every day if the lesson's continuing from the day before, or you're doing things like Regents prep. But yeah, it's still a lot every day. And one of my coworkers put it well. She's like, it's like you're holding 5 45-minute marketing meetings for 30 little humans who don't care about what you have to say, and you have to hold their interest for 45 minutes, and it's a lot. And I don't think people understand that.
Yeah, and they're being, teenagers I think are probably the most complex organism on this planet, because they're at the junction, they're at the intersection between so many things biologically, and I mean like hormonally, structurally, they're growing. One one student, his voice has been cracking the entire year,
Oh, wow.
and he's a ninth grader. His name is Steve, and it's perpetual though. It's not like every now and then. His voice is like this the entire time, and it's so funny. That's actually one of the hardest things, is not laughing, but he's smiling as he's doing it because he recognizes it, and I've spoken to him about it. He's like, yeah, this is just it. I think soon it'll stop. I'm like, it's wild. I've never had a student like that before, where yeah, of course, ninth graders, you get the voice cracking, but
Yeah.
this is literally perpetual. It's every single word, and it is tough. But going back, they're at the intersection of so many different things. They're at the wrath of their hormones. They're very energetic. They are on the earliest point of being an adult and the latest point of being, you know, just a child. So
Yeah.
there is so many different forces pulling at them in different directions. Their natural predisposition towards looking for their parents for guidance shifts between like ages 10 to or ages like 9 to about 12, 13, to focusing on their peers. And you sense that so much with the rebellion, and they form these cliques and these clusters and these groups. They
Yeah.
have little squabbles over absolutely nonsense.
Hmm.
uh, but I just think they really are the most interesting creatures, and I don't mean to like animalize them, but they really are just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think that's another reason I got into teaching. I've always loved people. I've always found them interesting. I like getting to know all of their interests and hobbies and personalities. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about teaching is getting to know all these kids and their different idiosyncrasies and things they like to do, don't like. They're all very different and they're funny. At the end of the day, most kids are genuinely good-hearted and they're funny.
I think they kind of keep us in some sort of way, like young or fresh or something about it, because they're giving us a youthful perspective on everything, from something that Donald Trump or Joe Biden said, in an interview, and we get their perspective of this particular issue, or an artist that we'll hear them way after them, but my students, I have a group of students who I can't tell if they're being serious or not, but they're obsessed with Ice Spice.
Oh, yeah.
Four male students who, for some reason, and they're constantly. I mean, we had a poetry unit, and they asked if they can do a response to an Ice Spice song, and I was like, "Are you guys insane?" And they looked at each other like, "Yes." I was like, "Okay, go ahead." As long as you're using these tools and these techniques, because we learn through playing. We have, if we're having fun with this process.
Yeah, definitely. That's great that you did that. I hope they put it on TikTok and stitch it with her so she can respond.
Oh God.
I think
Uh,
they knowing what they're talking about though, like you said, it helps with rapport and it does keep us young. My friends definitely, and I'm sure your friends too, ask you what these new slang words mean because they have no idea. And the only reason I know is because we teach teenagers. So
yeah.
we know what the latest trends are. My friends were laughing. We know what the latest fashion trends are too. My friends were laughing that basically what we wore in high school and like the fact that Janko jeans and low rise jeans are back. And I was like, yeah. And like this grungy look is, but it's cool now and anime is cool now. And it wasn't when we were in high school. So definitely keeps you young.
The lingo too. I mean, all the words that I learn with them. It really is entertaining, and I love
Mm-hmm.
putting it in like a question, and like for a quiz, just to put in just casually, like one or two or three, like not overdoing it, not making it corny, but just in a particular location, and you'll hear it. I'll hear when they're reading it during the exam, because it'll be completely quiet, and then you'll just hear like a from like different corners of the room, and you're like, oh, that's nice. They're less aggravated for the fact that they're
Yeah.
taking, yet another exam. And it is, again, it's once again like that strange humanization that you can use. And I feel like a lot of the techniques and tools and skills and I guess character traits of a good teacher or not a bad teacher are character traits of anyone who wants to be, I guess, to some degree, leading, to be leading people, whether it's in a business or a small team or anything of that sort, a project manager. You have to use these kind of skills to sustain people's interests, especially in 2023.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think wanting to be a leader and also being social helps a lot too. And someone who has varied interests or is interested in various things definitely helps a lot. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a lot. It's a big social job. If you're not someone who likes that much interaction with people, it's not a job I recommend for people. It's
Yeah, because you
at
get
least
such a diversity of it.
yeah, at least 30 to 34 kids and 5 sets of them if you're not teaching an extra class. So I have 6 classes, so that's even more. Then you have your interactions with
Oh,
students in the
wow.
hallway, so that's even more kids. Plus your interactions with the adults and staff. So it's a very social job from 8 to 3. And I feel like when 3 o'clock hits, I'm like, I need an hour of silence.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like I think I'm very far on the extroverted side, and even me
You? No way.
at like 3 o'clock, I just need to be in like the corner of a room, like alone, just to like recharge, because you're talking to 100 people a day, and they're very energetic people. These kids.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a saying which I really do not like, that teaching is a thankless job. And I think I understand to some degree where this would originate. What are your thoughts on this? And, if you would agree or disagree in some sort of parts, can you expand on that a little bit?
I know that saying too. I don't agree with it. I do think I wish teachers were appreciated a little bit more by American society. One of my wildlife bio classmates teaches in Finland, and we were talking about the differences. And she said there she can literally raise her eyebrow and like a pin drops, and they're paid well, and society really respects them. And I don't feel like that's the same consensus here. I'm not sure how it is in Armenia. I'm guessing it's probably different from here as well. But it's it's not a job I would sign up for if you are looking for appreciation every day or gratitude every day or some sort of reward, because you're not going to get that validation every day. There's going to be days that are really not great. I'm sure we've all had them, but it it's not what you're doing it for. Again, you're doing it just so that kids can have the best education possible, and you're hoping that you're doing a good job. And if it's just one kid at the end of the year that's saying thank you, or I've had kids come back and say, thanks, I passed that Regents because of you. And it's not because of me, it's what they did. But just that one kid saying that, it doesn't matter if the rest of them haven't said anything to me the whole year, that will make a whole lot of difference.
I've had students talk about you to me in when we were in the same school, and they always had really nice words. What like the one thing that would, for me, it's a compliment, but the one thing that could maybe be more ambiguous is when they were like, yeah, she has a death stare, or she just look at us, and we're all like, okay, maybe we should shut up. Maybe we should shut up now.
Yeah, that's funny because one of our new coworkers was asking our students recently if I have any catchphrases, and he said they said no. She just kind of glares at us until we're like, oh, maybe we should stop doing that, and that's so it's not changed.
But some teachers can stare and stare and stare, and oh my God, I remember when I was in high school, the teacher said the really silly, and like now it's a meme, but they were like, I'll wait.
Hmm.
Like I'll wait.
Hmm.
And I remember I think it was a chemistry class. And the one of my friends next to me just goes, "Oh, we'll only be a few minutes." And I was like, Jesus Christ.
That's really funny.
So I learned in my high school experience never to never to say that phrase.
That's great. But I think that is one of the tricks that also works is being patient. I don't think you should be a teacher if you're not a patient person, which a lot of people I know that don't teach have said to me, they're like, I could never do that. I wouldn't be patient enough. But you're going to have days where it's hard to control the classroom no matter what you do. And I think just being patient and the ability to sit and wait and understand that you might not get through the lesson, but that the kids will figure it out quickly and soon enough start shushing each other is one of the most effective management techniques out there. It's an old one, but it does work. Like I refuse
Yeah.
to yell over kids. I'm not a loud person as it is, so I've just never been one to scream at kids. I can't do it. I have coworkers who are very loud, and they use it, and it works. It works if you're a loud person, but for me, I it doesn't. It's not my personality style at all. So not what I would do.
I already know the answer to this question, but you've walked by a classroom and you've heard a teacher, their voice, guys, guys, come, like, and they're trying their best to calm the classroom down, and it just fails, and you're listening to it, and there's one part of you, maybe, but definitely for me, that wants to go into the classroom and just try and help them, because you've sensed what that's like. There's sometimes something will cause a disruption, but you also, there's another part of you that's like, you shouldn't even be at that place where you're shouting, guys, guys.
No, no, it doesn't usually work.
But have you had that experience where you're just walking through the hallways and you hear it and you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, I've heard that, or I've heard the really loud, angry yelling too. The not even the desperate pleading yelling, but the really angry shouting. That's a lot. And yeah, no, I don't. I'm sure the louder people it can work for settling them down, but I'm not sure how well that works for feeling like kids feeling like they can approach you if you're that intense in terms of rapport in the classroom. Yeah.
I don't think, striking a little bit of fear in students has any positive effect, because we don't learn, like, mentally, like, psychologically, all of our faculties move away from hypothetical thinking and higher order thinking and go more towards emergency mode when we're yelling at someone.
Yeah, no, withdrawal, like it makes them less inclined to want to
Oh
share
yeah.
and participate. And
And you could see it. They freeze, some of them.
yeah, and like you said, and we've been saying, I think part of being a good teacher is being human and, being approachable for the kids too, that they can feel like they can come to you and speak to you. I tell kids the first day of school, my biggest thing is communication. I'd rather you tell me what's going on with you and you ask for an extension one on one than you just don't turn work in at all or lie about it and submit it late. Or it's just like we want from people we're friends with and everything. Just be transparent, and be able to advocate for yourself. But you have to, as a teacher, kind of create that environment where they feel like they can advocate for themselves and approach you accordingly.
I think we've discussed quite a few different strategies for how that, how one can create that sort of environment. And it's interesting. I mean, even the Danielson framework, the rubric for how teachers are graded. I mean, out of the 22 or so, different requisites, I think three or four of them are directly about essentially creating an atmosphere of good rapport, of the students and the teacher having some sort of an understanding of each other, and what the sort of basically classroom management type, like a social classroom management element. So even I don't think four is enough personally. I think much of teaching is that social aspect, because you need people to feel safe and comfortable, and also you need to know what they know to get them to be intrigued. We had a Haitian student, who I think you definitely remember, and he I just remember when we were in my introductory lesson is a letter that I write to my students. I share it out to the class to let them know that I'm going to be open with you guys. Um, And their first assignment is to write a letter back to me. And I take the information from that letter and I try and put it, some of it into lessons, whether if a whole third of them enjoy this particular artist or this movie or the show that's on or whatever. And one student mentioned that their mother was a radiologist. And this was a very social and energetic student. He was always talking with a bunch of people and he was a very charismatic guy. And I remember I was talking about, career development, and I just turn and I mention the student's name and I say, so your mom is a radiologist. So think of it this way. And I just turn back and I incorporate that particular element and I continue the conversation. I'm not even looking at the student anymore. I know 100% that whatever conversation he was having is off and his ears are perked right now. And the people around him are listening now. His friends are listening because to some degree I'm addressing his mother. And it's obviously, it's something, respectful. And I'm trying to include his elements of his life or his family's life into the lesson. And that's also the only way to possibly do that is to care about the students, their lives, their interests, and things of that sort.
That's funny that that's your first day assignment. I also do that. I think the letter is a good one. You get to find out a lot about the kids when they respond. I think the important thing is to actually read the letter and then try and remember some things. I don't remember everything, but like you're saying, that's really cool that you incorporate that in every lesson.
But not
Or
every lesson. I
even,
don't want to. I
well, a
don't want
lot of
to.
them. Sorry, yeah,
I
but
try to. Yeah,
yeah,
it'll be
that's
very
great.
difficult.
I feel like I try and use that as ways to talk to them, bringing up something of that throughout the year if you can. Again, which we've talked about before, is just humanizing yourself and trying to show you care about them. And I like the letter as a way to do that. I know a lot of people like those icebreaker games, and I think you can do both the same day, but I do prefer the letters. I do like reading about the students when they come in that first day and getting to kind of see who they are a little bit.
Can you tell me? So going back to the teaching is a thankless job. I can tell you one of my favorite moments ever was in I think the first or second week of 10th grade. So I had my lovely freshies from the year before, and sorry, I wasn't teaching 10th grade. I was teaching ninth grade, and the ninth graders of the previous year obviously were 10th graders, and I heard them in the hallway. It was early in the morning. I was just about like I was halfway through my iced coffee and I hear some of my freshmen from last year, and they're coming up the stairs, and one of them says something along the lines of, like, Allison, where are you going? We're supposed to, like, our classrooms on this side, and she goes, we didn't say good morning to Mr. Armin yet, and I swear, like, I teared up. I was just so like that and like once again it leads to that consistency because every morning they would come into my class. I would say good morning, and like that would be the beginning of the day. I would ask them how they are, and then when the first bell rang, because they would be in my classroom obviously a little bit before, so there was that consistency. So they kind of needed that in 10th grade, even though I wasn't their first period class anymore. This idea that their day started by just saying good morning to me and whatever other teachers that they seemed to like from the prior year. So I think and I haven't really thought about it in terms of consistency, but I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah, it's again, it's not going to be big things. If you're looking for gifts or big things like that, winning awards, and it's great when people do get those, but you're not going to see that every day. You're going to find it in the little moments with things like that, the good mornings. Similar to you, I have a student I had 3 years ago. Now he's in 11th grade. He still finds me every day and dabs me up just to dab me up and say, how are you? And if I'm out, he's like, you weren't here. Where were you? I didn't see you. So like they do notice. And it's just like the small things like that. It does make me smile. Like that makes it worth it every day. Just the kids those little moments like that.
Yeah, because you're the source of benevolence and goodness in their life, and who knows what kind of other things are happening in their lives. There's it could be it's a teenage life. It could be there's ups and downs all the time.
Yeah.
That's another thing about I think that most people don't know about high school teachers is that literally anything can happen. I had one student when I was teaching 10th grade. I had one student who had a panic attack for the very first time. And everyone thought she was laughing because she was just like, and they're like, Sonia, what's going on? And everyone was just looking at her. And then she was just like clutching her chest. And I was like, oh God, this is bad. So I just had everyone step outside and we did boxed breathing. And, there's tears coming out of her eyes and she didn't know what was happening, the poor girl. And like, that's not something that we're necessarily well equipped for if we're very much focused on this piece of literature or this particular idea, the scientific concept, to suddenly there's a giant wrench that's thrown into our lesson. And by the way, an hour later, we have the same lesson. And now we have to think about how do we parallel these classes when one was disrupted by a panic attack. That's something that I
Yeah,
think people don't know about teachers at all.
I would agree with you. I was just thinking of that. I was like, there's a lot that happens day to day. I don't think people know about either. Things we're not equipped for. Not the same as you, but we had a student pick up a pair of child scissors and he cut another kid's hand by accident in the middle of my class because he went to cut his headphones fooling around, and the kid started bleeding in the middle of class, and to get my principal to stand in the doorway, take the kid out, walk him down to the nurse, and it's just like put paper towel on his hand and staunch the bleeding. But it was very disruptive. It was 20 to 30 minutes of the period lost. But I think, like you were saying, people don't realize we have to be flexible too, and we kind of have to be ready for anything, really, which
Right.
is a lot, and things we're not trained for. Kids that come to you with major personal issues, whether it's suicidal thoughts, things like that, those ideations, especially as an English teacher, I'm sure you might even be more prone to finding them if you do those kind of journaling
Right.
or any writing sort of prompts. Those things we have to deal with. We're not trained therapists and counselors, and you still take an emotional kind of hit from it, even if you aren't the one who ultimately deals with it after you refer them to the counselor or whoever they have to go to. But it's still, we take on a lot, and there's a lot that people don't see. And I think especially
Yeah.
during COVID, we took on even more that people don't know about, and that was a whole other mental drain. Yeah.
Don't even.
Oh my gosh.
I, I,
I was
I
just
mean,
thinking about that.
remote learning for me is an oxymoron. I really can't understand. I mean, it's just how anything was possibly learned in that kind of environment. I
I
just
hated
can't.
it. I don't know about
Yeah.
you. I'm sure you did. I know
Oh, I
some
loved
friends.
it. It was
I
the
know
worst
some
thing ever.
people. I know some people who did enjoy it. I personally hated it because the whole reason I signed up for teaching is because I'm social. I like the mental stimulation. I like the social interactions. I've
Right.
always liked talking to people. My mom told me when I was a kid, someone told her once I was going to get kidnapped because I talked to strangers so much when I was like 4. But COVID took all of that away. That those black boxes really, really were terrible, and it was terrible for the
Yeah.
kids and all those initiatives that we had to take on too, where we had to check in on the Scion kids to make sure they're okay and all the stuff that was going on in their homes that we couldn't help with. I don't know if you remember, we had students. I'm sure you remember we had students when we would check in on them that were like, my mom has COVID and we're a multi-family household, and now my grandma has COVID and I don't know what to do. And all we could do is keep texting them and just be like, are you okay? Like, but we couldn't really
Yeah.
do much, which was awful.
I mean, that was, I think, one of the things that made teaching worthwhile for me the most. And it wasn't always common, but it would be maybe once or twice or three times a month where a student would confide something in me, and they would say something along. I mean, this is another thing that people don't know about, I guess, teachers, is that if you develop like a good relationship with a student, they'll trust you with information about what's happening in their heads that they can't even talk to their friends about. I had in And sometimes it's even a what do you call it? It's a pattern. So in I think it was early October, um, a senior walked into my classroom, and they were my junior the year prior, and they happened to have been my freshman 3 years prior. And they said, Mr. Harmon, can I just talk to you? I'm not doing too well. I'm like, what's wrong? And they're like, I just there's a lot on my mind. I'm like, okay, here, let's do this. So I can already tell they're overwhelmed. They don't really even know what's wrong. So I take them essentially to the window. I look out of the window, so I'm not like just staring right at them. And I look out of the window and I tell them, you look out of the window, so, we'll just casually talk. So, like something that's bothering me is that I haven't slept well for the last few days. I don't know why, but I keep waking up in the middle of the night. That's something that's on my mind, and it's annoying me. And then I'm like, so what's bothering you? So I'm kind of like modeling, essentially, just essentially venting. And, sometimes I've even lied. I've made up a thing to be, upset about. Um, and the student immediately bursted into tears and just started talking about how it's senior year. They're not sure about colleges, and there's just all these things they have to do, the college essay, all these different applications. They're already missing their friends, but they have a whole senior year basically, but they're already thinking about leaving their friends. They're not sure about if they're going to get into college, if they're going to get into the right college. They feel like their whole life is being determined in the next few months, which it's not. Uh,
Mm-mm.
but it's, and after a while, I was just like, well, you could think about that. You could take that approach with every single moment in your life. You grab a Snickers or you grab Oreos. That might change the whole fate of your life, but it's really not. Like you're you. You're going to keep being you throughout. And of course, things obviously will change whether you go to this school or this school, but you're still going to be you. You're still going to make friends. And if the friendship that you had prior continues, then it was supposed to continue. And if it doesn't, maybe you've grown away from each other, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is fine. And then within a week, I had another student, same class, was also one of my freshmen, was also one of my juniors, come in like, Mr. Armin, can I talk to you for a second? Like, yeah. And also just bursted into tears. It's almost identical scenario. And I was so tempted to be like, hey, just so you know, your friend is going through the exact same thing. But obviously, I knew that wasn't the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome that they are able to come to you. I think that's really important for them to be able to do that.
I know students have definitely come to you too with aggravations on their minds, and even if it's
Yeah.
little petty things.
Yeah, they do. It's I've had personal life. There's the worry of moving on because I teach eighth grade now. The big fear is high school and going to high
Right.
school and not going to school with their friends anymore. So a lot of that anxiety is coming up for them. But similar to what you're saying, I think they're kids. They don't understand a lot of the what's meant to be will be kind of thing. And if people are good friends, they'll stay in your life. It's still a little bit hard for them to reconcile with, but I think it helps for them to have an adult to talk to about it and reassure them of that. I've told them that I'm like, it's okay that you're not going to the same high school. If you guys are good friends, you're still going to be friends. Just because you're going to different high schools doesn't mean that friendship's going to end. But it's definitely a big concern for them, big worry. And college is a big one too. It's
Right.
change. It's change. Change scares a lot of children.
That's interesting that so you, because you've taught in both high school and middle school, you see that there's that fear of moving on. And I
Yes.
don't know, we keep going back to consistency. That's a very clear extrinsic disruption of what has been consistent for them.
Yeah, and a lot of kids, like you were saying earlier, we don't know what's going on with them outside, at home, and whatever. And school is a safe space for a lot of kids, or it's at least a space where they feel like they can totally be themselves, or that they know and it's theirs, and they're moving on from that. And oftentimes, college, it's very they're going to very big schools, and it's definitely uncomfortable.
Right.
But they're losing that consistency. And it's very different for me. I don't know about you, but when I was a student, I didn't talk to my teachers like at
No,
all.
not at all.
Like
Not at
these
all.
kids talk to us. I find it really funny that they talk to us so much. I had a student ask me, she's like, "Oh, didn't you talk to your teachers like this?" And I said, "No, I literally did my work and I like moved on to the next class, and that was it."
Absolutely. And that's something that I think is definitely a universal thing. Not universal, but definitely within New York, because it's everywhere. Like you have, students trying to find the social medias of their teachers. It's like I would never even consider trying to add any of my teachers, even the ones I really, really liked. Maybe I would
Yep.
get their email. I would, I'm just trying to like parallel it to today. I would probably try and get their email just to, if I really had like a good bond with the teacher, I would email them, once or twice or three times a year to let them know how things are going and ask how everything's going and how their current class compared to our class, just out of just curiosity and all that stuff. But I would never in a million years, you know, I've had to block so many kids on Instagram.
Yeah, that
It's
it,
just weird.
it's like a weird positive and negative, the information and the confidence they've gotten from social media. I would say I've also had to block a lot of kids, and like you're saying, I never would have dreamed of being interested in finding my teacher's social media, which for us at the
It's
time
so
was
strange.
email. Like I don't even think I would have asked any of my teachers for their personal emails. I just wasn't connected to them enough, which I guess is a good shift. That kids are feeling more connected to their teachers in a personal way and in a way that they feel like they do want to know them outside of school. Like I think that part is cool. I don't love the creeping and having to block kids until they graduate, but it is nice that they are kind of curious, I think. And most of them it's in a good way. It's not like an ill-intentioned way that they're trying to find your social media. And I think that's also um, a good plus from social media is they are finding ways to be more confident at a younger age and be more social and advocate for themselves, even just I don't even call it advocating for themselves, but that they feel that comfortable talking to their teachers and trying to get to know them outside of the classroom. Like I was a social kid with my peers, but I was kind of intimidated by my teachers in like 8th grade, high school, and I never really would have dreamed of approaching them to talk to them about their lives outside of like asking if I'm missing work or something. So I think that's been a good thing for them is they are able to kind of advocate and talk about their emotions with us as adults. And it says a good thing about our generation as teachers is that we are approachable in that way. And they seem to be
Yeah.
more accepting of each other than they were when we were younger. Like there's still the online bullying and everything, but generally there seems to have been an overall positive shift to more different like body positive acceptance and
Mhm.
acceptance of the LGBTQIA community and kids being able to be comfortable identifying as trans in like 8th grade is a big step, I think. And that's been a positive from social media, I would say for sure. Is I feel like there's more acceptance at a younger age with kids being
Yeah.
different than there was when we were younger.
Yeah. Perhaps not in the household sometimes because,
No, not
and
always.
I try and because I don't want to encroach on any of these things, and
Yeah,
I feel like there's still information, especially
yeah,
about like the trans movement. There's still a lot of
yes,
information that needs to be understood. So I stay away from that. But I had
yeah,
in ninth grade several times I've had students basically say to the class or say to me that they would rather be called they them,
yep,
and I'm like, okay, like if that's something that if it's making you comfortable, because my priority is for you to learn, and I know that a
mm-hmm.
requisite to learning is for you to be comfortable. So if I call you she and your your perception of yourself doesn't match that to the extent in which it distracts you, it makes you feel whatever, in a negative way, then I'm unnecessarily creating an uphill battle for both you and I. And that's the opposite of what I want. I want things, I want you to learn essentially. And that requires that comfort.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good that the kids are accepting of basically who mostly each other wants to be at that moment, despite all the
Yeah.
other layers to it. They don't seem to.
Which a few decades ago
Yeah,
definitely would not be
yeah,
acceptable at
no,
all, which is
yeah,
not good.
mm-hmm.
That's another thing that I think perhaps people don't know is that that level of comfort has reached an absolute zenith. I mean, again, I've been I was I don't want to say friendly, but I've been on really good terms with some maybe two or three of my high school teachers, and I didn't ask any of them for their email. because it's just we're just such a out of completely not in the framework in my mind that that was okay to do.
Yeah, yeah, same. There were definitely a few I really liked, but I still would never have done that either.
Speaking of the changes,
Hmm.
AI is something that a lot of teachers and a lot of people are panicking about, of course. What are your, how have you kind of seen AI manifest in your school, whether it's by the teacher side or by the student side?
Luckily, I haven't encountered too much of that yet. But my coworker did have a kid use Chat GPT recently, and it, I think, is fairly hard to catch in terms of she has them analyzing art in an English class. So they had an essay where they had to, I think, analyze an artist or their artworks, but the way the student wrote it, and this goes back to having to know your students and caring about them. The way he wrote it was like the syntax was so different from how he normally writes that she could just tell.
Inexorably,
Yes,
Van Gogh
no,
decided.
that's literally kind of how it sounded when she read me one of the paragraphs from it. And her friend, who's an art curator, she read it to, and her friend even said, we don't even talk about it like that in the art community. Like it was written so differently from how the student writes or speaks that she could just tell. And I think she was able to run it through. I don't know. There's a program where you can, I think, kind of cross check if it did come from something like that. And it confirmed it. But it was a little sneakier because it wasn't any sort of like just blatant copying, pasting like we're used to with
Yeah.
plagiarism. But it was just because she knew his writing samples. She's paid attention to who he is as a student and how he speaks that she could tell like he had not written it himself. And it confirmed hits with, yeah, Chat GPT. So it's starting to trickle down even to middle school because that's an eighth grader that did that. So it's definitely a
Yeah.
concern. My friend is student teaching at a high school, and he had sent me a warning about it a little earlier. But I can see that showing up in high school more quickly because you write lengthier papers in high school and research assignments. So I can see that being an easy out for kids to use and them defaulting to it more quickly than a typical eighth grader would. But they caught it at his school because the student had written or had left in, I guess, when you use Chat GPT, it generates and says this was written by Chat GPT. Like there's some sort of introductory sentence that the kid did
Right.
not remove. So it literally said that. So that's how they caught it, but the kid didn't even pay
What a
attention
dope.
enough to remove that. Yeah. But I think it's going to be hard. You're going to really have to know how your students write and who they are and how they speak to kind of catch it. And if you don't, I think it will be harder for teachers to catch on to.
Personally, so the way it's been manifesting in my school is very similar. People, the teachers are very concerned about cheating via
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT and there's other AIs, of course. I am not even remotely afraid or
Great.
nervous or anxious about it. And I think, again, part of it is because you need to know how to use ChatGPT. And if you are a teacher who can create assignments that are both general in that they have flexibility to them, that confuses ChatGPT. If it's such a broad prompt, it won't pump out great information or great content. And if your assignments have a personal element to it, where they compare a moment of their own
Life.
lives
Yeah.
or something of that sort, because then it's really it's asking ChatGPT to incorporate their own lives. Now, of course, they can have a vague, broad, mediocre text, and then from ChatGPT, and then incorporate a almost template style life snippet, not their own life, but ChatGPT can tell a story about when they were fishing and compare that to Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And it can do something like that, but
Yeah.
it makes it so much more difficult for them to produce any sort of content that isn't very clearly made by a machine. So for me, that's kind of how I've been looking at ChatGPT and AI. What I'm more nervous about, to be completely honest, is teachers being replaced eventually. because we have facial recognition, and they can register if you're interested based on your eyes, your eyebrows. You have Khan Academy and a variety of different softwares that they measure by the millisecond how long it took for you to get a problem correct or incorrect. How long were you struggling? And they will recreate the content, aiming always at your weaknesses. And every theory from Vygotsky to Piaget to all of this stuff is in the machinery. So that's what I'm more worried about. But there is the human element is missing, and the question will eventually be how necessary is that. Fortunately, we kind of have, well, unfortunately and fortunately, we have that answer from remote learning, the abysmal failure of remote learning.
Yeah, I would say I'm not that concerned about it yet. I could see it maybe being a problem with years from now, but I think just coming out of remote learning, I think the human element of teaching is it's irreplaceable, and being able to help students in person live, like when they're struggling, is irreplaceable. Like I know the Khan Academy and everything can adjust, and they're still great tools if you know how to use them well in the classroom, but I think nothing replaces the personal interaction and assistance kids can get from being in a classroom. And I also think, unfortunately, we are also kind of, I hate to say it, but a little bit of a babysitter. So I
Oh, 100%. 100%.
babysitting facility. So I don't see that going away to anytime soon, just because parents will do want their kids in school and for them to be out of the house
To
and
stay out of trouble,
yeah, stay out of
yeah.
trouble.
And the kids need it to
Yeah.
sometimes to get something off of their chest that they can't tell their friends, they can't tell their families. They'll you mentioned students talking about suicide. I had one student who, in a poetry assignment, wrote something very concerning. So I sat down with her and I was like, what is this? And she was like, I just wanted to put all my anger in one poem. This isn't how I feel. This is like the scream version of something that I feel my mind is whispering. And I was like, okay. And I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, I'm glad that they like sublimated, that they took that negative energy and had a good like coping mechanism to expunge it. But the machine, you won't pump that into a machine. You won't be able to have that out in a machine or anything of that sort.
No.
And if it's not released, it's going to be bottled up, and who knows what that can snowball into, what other things that affects.
Yeah, and I think a lot of kids like the social interactions from school too, not even just with teachers, but with their friends. We have a lot of kids that don't actually hang out with each other outside of school. Like they're friends,
Yeah,
but the only time they get to hang out with people is in school. So I think that will make it hard for kind of the AI technology to take over too.
that reminded me. I remember when we had those like false starts for in-person learning again.
Yep, I do.
I remember a student coming up to me like maybe 2, 3 months into this failed attempt, and they were like, Mr. Harmon, I have a weird question. And I was like, okay, go ahead. And they were like, how do you make a friend? And I was like,
Aw,
oh, you poor thing. Because their eighth grade and seventh grade was completely
remote.
remote, and they just had no idea. And like that's the time where you start learning,
Mm-hmm.
I guess where you really start focusing on your social standing and your social connections and all that stuff with your peers, your cohorts. And I was just like, well, you join clubs. And I was like, well, we're not really doing clubs right
Oh
now.
no, yeah, we
It's
had
like,
those
oh,
limitations for a while.
yeah. It was like every answer I had, like, I don't know. Like you find people with common interests. Maybe you can ask who's into this show or this book or this movie or this artist, whatever. And because that's shared interest is like one of the most primary ways, and it's always been that way. So you got to find out how to do that with a mask on, and seeing each other for this period of time. And some students aren't in for 2 weeks because of they might have been infected, and et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah,
that was a very odd conversation.
it's not something I think we thought about. I think we're so focused on our favorite buzzword, learning loss, that we forgot
Yeah.
about all the social loss and social interactions that kids didn't have. And when they came back, a lot of it was kind of teaching them how to interact socially in an appropriate way again. And that was a whole other layer to teaching that we didn't anticipate. And that full year back was kind of draining in that way. I know the group I first had full time when we were fully back in person last year, that was in 10th grade. I guess the last time they were in person was 8th grade. And they were still kind of like middle schoolers in the way they acted in the classroom. Like they were like constantly play fighting and like horsing around and like throwing paper balls at each other and breaking pencils. And I remember being so confused because I had taught high school for a while, and I knew 9th grade was like that for a bit, but usually that behavior, if you got your management under control, kind of dies around like November, December. It stops because you have your routines. The kids get used to what the expectations are. It did not stop at all last year. It was like every day was like their first day back in school, and it was constantly like, can we stop pushing each other? Can we stop breaking pencils? And there's like 1,000 paper cuts. It wasn't anything egregious. There was no fighting, like there weren't true fights or anything, but it was just teaching them how to interact socially in an appropriate way, because like you said, the last time they were in school was 2 years earlier, and they're still kind of stuck in whatever grade that was mindset socially, and that was a lot to come back to.
I think that was one of the most impressive statements I've ever heard. We're so focused on learning loss that we forgot about the social learning loss. Like that's so key. That's so key.
Yeah.
I I want to ask you, since you've already taught us quite a lot as a science teacher. Is there anything that you can leave us with? Any sort of thing that you can teach us, so that we have a little piece of science education in this fifth episode of Universal?
Sure. I like wildlife, so I'll leave you with a random wildlife fact. But most birds do not produce milk. There are three species that do: emperor penguins, flamingos, and pigeons. And fun fact, both male and female pigeons can produce milk for their babies.
Wait. Pigeons produce milk?
Yeah, it's not done the typical way. It's not the way mammals do.
It's not through the mammaries?
No, not through their mammaries. It's within their mouth that it happens, and they can produce a kind of milk-like substance that they feed their chicks. Yeah, yeah. And I think an
I want to try pigeon milk.
Go ahead, let me know how it tastes. I'll leave you alone on that one. Sure.
You don't want to join me? What about penguin
Sure.
milk?
Sure, why
Penguins
not?
produce milk?
Emperor penguins. I think it's the males only, though. The females
Even
do
your
not.
cat was distraught by that.
She's like,
So
ew.
it was emperor penguins, pigeons, and then you said a third.
Flamingos, I believe.
Flamingos.
It's
Flamingo
called crop
milk?
milk. Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm
Yeah.
like a little grossed out, but
Sorry.
way more intrigued
Yeah.
than grossed out.
It's crop milk. It's produced in like a lower section of their esophagus, yeah, that's called the crop.
So they like spit out the milk?
I don't think so. I think the babies kind of like they do it mouth to mouth, like they pull it out of the parent's mouth.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I gotta learn about this. That's so cool. That's so cool.
Yep.
That was such a good choice. That was such a good choice.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, Elisabetta, is there anything that you want to add before we wrap this up?
No, I can't think of anything. I guess just continue working hard and being kind to people.
I love that. And again, thank you so much for discussing education for the fifth episode of Universal Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.